Atlas had crossed that creek 100 times. That afternoon, he refused. The winter trail behind Caleb Rowe's house lay quiet under 4 inches of fresh snow, winding through the pines like a pale ribbon stitched into the woods. The air was sharp enough to sting the lungs, clean with the smell of frost, cedar bark, and frozen earth. Caleb walked with his gloved hand loose around the lead, his boots pressing steady prints into the powder, while Atlas moved beside him with the calm precision of a dog who knew every bend, root, and fallen branch along the way. It should have been an ordinary training walk, a simple winter loop. 3 miles out, 3 miles back, then coffee, firewood, and dinner before dark. The creek waited half a mile ahead, narrow and familiar, no wider than 12 feet from bank to bank. In warmer months, it chattered over smooth stones. In winter, it froze into a cloudy white sheet, thin at the edges, thicker near the center, dusted with snow so clean it almost looked solid enough to trust. Caleb had crossed it before. So had Atlas. But when they reached the bank, the German shepherd stopped so suddenly the lead went still between them. Caleb took one more step before he noticed. "Heel," he said, soft but firm. Atlas did not move. The dog stood sideways in front of him, blocking the approach to the ice, his sable and black coat lifted slightly by the wind, ears forward, tail low but not tucked. His amber eyes were not on Caleb. They were fixed on the frozen creek. Caleb looked down. Nothing seemed wrong. The snow lay unbroken. The ice held the gray-blue light of late afternoon. A few brown leaves rested near the far side, frozen in place like small hands beneath glass. "Come on, boy," Caleb murmured. "We have done this crossing before." Atlas lowered his head until his nose hovered inches above the ice. He inhaled once, slow and deep, then shifted his weight backward. Caleb felt the change before he understood it. This was not fear. Atlas was not a dog who startled at weather or shadows. This was refusal with purpose. Caleb was a white Marine in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered, disciplined, and trained to trust what he could see, measure, and control. Thin ice had rules. Temperature, weight, distance, judgment. But Atlas lived in a world beneath judgment, a world of vibration, scent, pressure, and sounds too small for human pride. The wind moved through the branches overhead. Snow whispered from a pine bough and scattered like white ash. Caleb listened. At first, there was only winter silence. Then Atlas lifted one paw and placed it gently on Caleb's boot. Not hard, not dramatic, just enough to stop him. Caleb looked at that paw, then at the frozen creek. "What is it?" he whispered. Atlas gave no bark, no whine, no warning anyone else would have noticed. He only stared down through the ice as if something under that pale surface had spoken his name. Caleb's breath drifted white between them. The woods seemed to hold still. Far beneath the frozen sheet, almost too faint to be real, came a tiny sound. Tick. Caleb froze. Atlas did not. Caleb stayed still at the edge of the creek, listening to the tiny sound fade into the cold. For a few seconds, his mind tried to explain it away. Ice made noises. Trees shifted. Water moved under pressure. Winter had its own language, full of cracks, sighs, and small complaints that meant nothing until they meant everything. He looked at Atlas, then back at the white sheet stretched across the creek. In the clean light of late afternoon, it still looked safe. That was the trouble with danger in winter. It often wore the face of peace. Caleb had built his life around reading signs, but only the signs men taught other men to read. Tracks in mud, tension in a voice, a gate left open, a vehicle parked where it should not be. Since leaving active duty, he had tried to keep those instincts folded neatly into routine. His house sat less than a mile behind them, with firewood stacked under the porch roof, black coffee waiting in the thermos on the kitchen counter, and a small calendar by the door where he wrote down ordinary things just to prove ordinary still existed. Run 3 miles. Repair fence latch. Brush Atlas. Check generator fuel. Pay electric bill. Simple tasks. Straight lines. Nothing that asked him to remember too much. Atlas was part of that order, but also the one living thing allowed to interrupt it. Every morning, the German shepherd woke before sunrise and waited beside Caleb's bed without touching him, as if giving the man a choice to return to the day. Every evening, Atlas rested near the door with one ear open to the world. He did not fill the silence. He made it bearable. Caleb lowered his gaze to the paw still resting on his boot. The gesture was gentle, almost polite, but it carried more authority than a command shouted across a parade ground. "You hear something I do not," Caleb said. His voice looked small in the cold, turning white and disappearing. Atlas kept his paw there. Caleb crouched slowly, careful not to shift weight toward the creek. From this angle, he could see more detail in the ice. A faint gray shadow ran beneath the snow near the center, not a crack exactly, but a line where the current had thinned the frozen sheet from below. On the far bank, a cluster of reeds trembled though the wind was moving the other way. Caleb felt the back of his neck tighten. He picked up a small branch half buried in snow and tossed it gently onto the ice, several feet ahead. It landed with a soft skitter and slid to a stop. Nothing happened. The branch lay there, harmless and still. Caleb almost exhaled. Almost. Then Atlas shifted his weight backward and tugged the lead once. Not hard enough to pull Caleb off balance, only enough to say no. Caleb looked at him. "You are sure?" It was not a question. Atlas's ears angled forward. The woods grew quiet again. Too quiet. The way a room goes quiet just before someone says the thing everyone already knows. Caleb took one careful step back from the bank. Atlas moved with him. Another step. The lead loosened. For a heartbeat, the creek remained unchanged. Then the tiny sound returned. Tick, tick. A hairline split opened beneath the snow, dark and quick, traveling across the center of the creek like a secret finally losing strength. Caleb did not breathe. The branch trembled. The ice dipped once, then gave way in a clean, sudden break, folding into the black water below exactly where Caleb's next step would have landed. Cold water surged through the opening, silent at first, then loud enough to fill the hollow. Caleb stood frozen on the bank, the safe path gone in front of him. Atlas remained beside him, steady as stone, his paw still pressed against Caleb's boot. The creek opened wider in front of them, dark water moving beneath broken plates of ice, and Caleb felt the truth of what had almost happened settle into his bones. He did not step closer. He did not test the edge. He only stood there with Atlas beside him, watching the place where confidence had nearly carried him into danger. The German shepherd finally lifted his paw from Caleb's boot, but he did not relax. His ears turned downstream. His nose lifted into the wind. Caleb noticed the change at once. "What now?" he asked, quieter than before. Atlas took 2 steps along the bank, then stopped and looked back. The message was clear, but Caleb wished it were not. They were not done. He followed, keeping a careful distance from the broken edge where snow hid the true shape of the creek. The water made a low rushing sound now, louder since the ice had opened, slipping beneath white shelves and dark roots. The trail narrowed along the bank, bending through alder brush and young pines heavy with snow. Caleb moved slowly, his boots sinking deep, his breath white in the blue shade. Atlas kept his nose high, not tracking the ground this time, but reading the air that flowed along the creek like a cold, invisible road. After 50 yards, the dog stopped near a tangle of exposed roots where the current had undercut the bank. Something red was caught there, bright against the snow. Caleb crouched, bracing one hand on a tree trunk, and reached carefully without leaning over the water. His fingers closed around a small mitten, soaked at the wrist, red wool with a white snowflake stitched on the back. For a moment, the woods lost sound. Caleb stared at it in his gloved hand. It was too small for an adult, too clean to have been there long. Atlas gave a low whine, then turned farther downstream. Caleb's chest tightened. "No," he whispered, though he already knew no was not an answer the world owed him. He scanned the snow near the bank. At first, all he saw were broken reeds, wind marks, and his own boot prints behind him. Then his flashlight caught a small track near a fallen log. Not deer, not fox, a child's boot print, half filled with fresh powder, pointing away from the creek and into the trees. Beside it were smaller paw marks, round and uneven, like a young dog or puppy moving fast. Caleb reached for his phone with his free hand and called the sheriff's office. His voice stayed level because he made it stay level. He gave his name, his location, the broken ice, the child's mitten, and the direction of the tracks. The dispatcher told him to remain where he was if conditions were unsafe. Caleb looked at Atlas, who stood ahead of him in the snow, steady and waiting. "I will stay off the ice," Caleb said. "But there may be a child out here." He ended the call only after confirming help was on the way, then clipped the lead shorter and stepped toward the tracks. Atlas moved slowly at first, as if he understood the burden of what they were following. Snow had begun to fall again, light and dry, erasing the smallest details as it landed. Caleb knew they had minutes, not hours. The little boot prints led away from the creek through a stand of thin birch trees. The puppy tracks wove beside them, sometimes ahead, sometimes circling back, as if the small animal had been guiding or pleading. Caleb imagined a child hearing the ice crack, running scared, following a dog deeper into the woods because fear can make the wrong direction feel like the only one. He pushed the thought away and focused on what was in front of him. One print, then another, a bent reed, a scuff in the snow. Atlas paused at each sign, then chose the next. The forest dimmed as clouds covered the sun. The cold deepened. Caleb's dog tags tapped faintly under his jacket with each step, and beside him Atlas moved like a prayer with pause, leading him away from the place where death had opened and toward the place where life might still be waiting. The tracks pulled Caleb and Atlas away from the creek into a lower part of the woods where the snow lay deeper and the trees grew closer together. The world narrowed to white ground, black trunks, and the steady movement of Atlas ahead of him. Caleb kept the lead short but loose, trusting the German shepherd's pace, watching each small boot print before the falling snow softened it into nothing. Every few yards, Atlas stopped, lifted his head, and tasted the air. Then he moved again, not rushed, not uncertain, certain enough to make Caleb's fear walk behind him instead of in front. The child's tracks crossed a shallow deer path, circled once near a fallen pine, then continued uphill toward a ridge Caleb rarely visited in winter. The puppy prints stayed close, tiny marks beside the child's, sometimes vanishing beneath drifted snow, then appearing again near tufts of brown grass. Caleb bent once to touch the edge of a print, still sharp underneath the powder. Recent. Good boy, he whispered. Atlas did not turn. Praise could wait. The air changed as they climbed. The smell of running water faded, replaced by cold bark, frozen sap, and the faint smoky scent of old wood. Caleb knew there were abandoned hunting blinds scattered through this section of forest, left from leases that had expired years ago. Most were little more than plywood boxes on short stilts, weather-beaten, empty, and forgotten except by squirrels and wind. If a child had found one, there might be shelter. If not, the cold would keep asking for more than a small body could give. Caleb pressed the thought down and kept moving. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. Poor signal. A message from dispatch broke through in fragments. Deputies en route. Search team mobilizing. Stay visible if possible. Caleb looked around at the thick trees and dimming sky. Visible was not an option. Finding was. Atlas suddenly stopped near a stand of young hemlocks. His ears lifted. Caleb listened. Snow ticked softly against dry leaves. A branch creaked. Far behind them, faint and thin, a siren rose and fell, swallowed by the woods. Then Atlas gave one low sound. Not a bark, not a growl, but a careful rumble from deep in his chest. Caleb followed his gaze. Ahead, half hidden behind brush, stood an old hunting blind raised only a few feet off the ground. Its gray plywood walls leaned slightly. A torn green tarp hung over one side, stiff with ice. The small door was closed, but not latched. At the base of the steps, the snow was disturbed by little prints and palm marks. Caleb's heart began to pound slowly, heavily. He lifted one hand, signaling Atlas to stay close, and approached with his voice ready before his body got there. "Hello," he called gently. "My name is Caleb. I am here to help." No answer. Atlas stepped onto the first wooden step, then stopped and looked back, waiting. Caleb climbed beside him and eased the door open with 2 fingers. The inside smelled of old wood, cold air, and damp wool. His flashlight swept across the small space. In the corner, beneath a faded camouflage blanket, a little boy sat curled with his knees pulled to his chest. He could not have been more than 6. His cheeks were red from cold, his eyes wide and glassy with fear, but he was awake. Tucked against him was a small brown and white puppy, trembling, its nose pressed into the boy's coat. Caleb lowered the flashlight at once so it would not shine in their faces. "Hey there," he said softly. "You are safe now." The boy stared at Atlas first, not Caleb. Atlas sat in the doorway, calm and steady, filling the opening with warmth instead of fear. The puppy lifted its head and gave a tiny sound, then tucked closer to the child. Caleb slowly removed his field jacket and held it open. I'm going to keep you warm until the helpers get here. Is that all right? The boy nodded once, barely. Caleb wrapped the jacket around both the child and the puppy, careful and slow. Only then did the boy whisper. The ice made a sound. Caleb looked at Atlas, then back at the child. I know, he said. He heard it too. Outside, the first rescue lights flickered faintly through the trees, red against snow, like hope finding its way through the dark. Caleb kept his field jacket wrapped around the boy and the puppy while Atlas stayed in the doorway of the old hunting blind, broad chest facing the wind, body still as a shield against the cold. The boy's name was Owen. He said it in a voice so small Caleb had to lean closer to hear. 6 years old, blue coat, red mitten missing. A puppy named Scout pressed under his arm like a little heartbeat. Caleb spoke slowly, asking only what mattered, never pushing too hard. Owen had been walking with his grandfather near the lower trail when Scout slipped away after a rabbit track. The boy followed, just a few steps at first, then farther, then too far. By the time he heard the creek making strange sounds behind him, the trees no longer looked familiar. Caleb listened without blame. Children did not understand distance in winter. Fear made every direction feel urgent. You did the right thing finding shelter, Caleb told him. Owen looked at Atlas, who had not taken his eyes off the woods. Your dog found us. Yes, Caleb said. He is good at hearing what people miss. Owen reached one mittened hand toward Atlas, but stopped halfway, unsure. Atlas turned his head and gently touched the boy's glove with his nose. The puppy Scout lifted his face, sniffed once, then seemed to trust the room a little more. Outside, voices moved closer through the trees. Flashlights crossed the blind in pale streaks. A deputy called Caleb's name, and Caleb answered without raising his voice. Here. We are here. Moments later, 2 deputies and a paramedic reached the blind, breathing hard from the climb, but careful with their movements. No one crowded the boy. No one made the moment louder than it needed to be. The paramedic, a woman with kind eyes and snow on her shoulders, knelt in the doorway and smiled at Owen as if she had all the time in the world. You have been very brave, she said. Owen looked down at Scout. He was cold. Then you both did a good job keeping each other warm. Caleb stepped back just enough to give them room, though his hand remained near Atlas's collar. The paramedic checked Owen gently, wrapped another thermal blanket over Caleb's jacket, and gave the puppy a small towel from her pack. Atlas laid down beside the doorway, blocking the draft with his body. Caleb noticed the deputy watching him, then Atlas, then the small tracks leading back through the snow. Your dog led you here? The deputy asked. Caleb nodded. He stopped me at the creek first. The deputy's face changed. We got a call from the boy's grandfather about 40 minutes ago. Search teams were starting from the parking area. We were looking on the wrong side. Caleb looked at Owen, then at Atlas. The weight of that sentence moved through him slowly. The wrong side. How many times in life had rescue been close but pointed the wrong way? The paramedic lifted Owen carefully, wrapped safe and warm, while another responder tucked Scout inside a soft carrier with the towel. Owen's eyes filled when he thought they might be separated, so Caleb spoke before fear could take root. Scout is coming too, he said. Same ride. Same team. The boy nodded, trusting him because Atlas did. They carried Owen down through the trees as dusk folded deeper around the forest. Caleb walked behind the rescue crew, one hand on Atlas's lead, listening to the soft crunch of boots, the muted radio calls, the whisper of falling snow. When they reached the creek trail again, everyone stopped at the broken ice. The opening had widened, black water moving under ragged white edges exactly where a person might have crossed without thinking. No one spoke for a moment. Atlas stood at Caleb's side, calm, solemn, his amber eyes reflecting the rescue lights. Caleb felt his dog tags cold against his chest and understood the truth with a quiet ache. Atlas had not only warned him away from danger, he had turned him toward mercy. The rescue lights made the snow glow red and white as everyone moved back toward the lower access road. Owen was carried first, bundled in blankets, his small face turned toward the soft carrier where Scout rested under a towel. The puppy lifted his head once and gave a tiny sound, and Owen's eyes stayed on him until the paramedic promised they would not be separated. Caleb walked a few steps behind with Atlas beside him, the lead loose in his hand. His field jacket was still around the boy, so the cold reached through Caleb's shirt and settled along his arms, but he barely felt it. The creek's broken ice remained behind them, hidden now by trees and falling dusk, yet Caleb could still hear that tiny sound in his mind. Tick, tick, a warning small enough to ignore. A warning Atlas had not ignored. At the access road, Owen's grandfather stood near a sheriff's cruiser with both hands pressed to his mouth, his face pale beneath a wool cap. He was an older man, sturdy but shaken, wearing work gloves and a brown canvas coat dusted with snow. When he saw Owen, something in him loosened so completely he had to hold the side of the cruiser to stay upright. The paramedic guided him gently toward the ambulance. "He is safe," she said. "Cold and tired, but safe." The old man touched Owen's hair, then Scout's towel, then looked at Caleb with eyes full of more gratitude than words could carry. "I only looked away for a minute," he said, voice breaking quietly. Caleb knew that sentence. Not the exact words, but the shape of it. The way guilt tries to make a home in one small moment and live there forever. "He found shelter," Caleb said. "He stayed smart. And he kept his puppy warm." The old man nodded, but his eyes moved to Atlas. The German shepherd stood calm in the snow, amber eyes steady, breath rising white from his muzzle. "Your dog," the grandfather whispered. Caleb looked down at Atlas and rested a hand between his ears. "He listened better than the rest of us." The ambulance doors closed with Owen and Scout inside, warm light sealing them away from the cold. The sheriff told Caleb that a team would return in daylight to mark the creek and block the unsafe crossing. The ice had weakened from a hidden current running beneath the snow, impossible to judge by sight alone. Caleb nodded, but the explanation did not make the moment feel smaller. In some ways, it made it heavier. He had trusted the surface because the surface looked calm. Atlas had trusted what moved underneath. After the ambulance pulled away, the woods grew quieter. Deputies packed their gear. Radio voices softened. The first stars appeared above the black line of pines. Caleb stood near the trailhead, watching the tire tracks fade into the road, and felt an old memory rise from somewhere he rarely let it breathe. Another winter. Another small signal. A loose strap. A strange silence on a radio check. A feeling he had pushed aside because the plan said keep moving. No one had blamed him afterward. That had almost made it worse. Forgiveness from others does not always reach the place where a man keeps his own verdict. Atlas leaned against his leg, warm and solid. Caleb lowered his hand to the dog's collar and felt the metal tag there, cold against his glove. "I missed one once," Caleb whispered, so low no one else could hear. Atlas looked up at him, not with judgment, not with questions, only with the same patient steadiness that had stopped him at the creek. The wind moved through the trees. Snow settled on Atlas's back and melted into his fur. Caleb closed his eyes for one breath. When he opened them, the broken place inside him had not vanished, but it had thawed at the edges. Tonight, he had listened. Tonight, a child was going home. And beside him, Atlas stood like proof that grace sometimes begins with a warning almost too small to hear. Caleb did not drive home immediately. After the last cruiser rolled away and the access road fell quiet again, he stood beside his truck with Atlas at his knee, watching the red glow disappear between the trees. The cold had deepened, turning the snow crust firm beneath his boots. His field jacket was gone with Owen, and the night air pressed through his shirt, but he let it. Some cold was useful. It reminded a man he was still here. He opened the passenger door for Atlas, then paused. The German shepherd looked up at him, waiting. For years, Caleb had believed healing meant learning how to move forward without looking back. Keep the routine. Keep the yard clear. Keep the dog trained. Keep the memories packed tight enough that they could not spill into the day. But the creek had shown him something different. The past was not always a place that dragged you under. Sometimes it was a frozen crossing asking to be respected before you stepped on it. Caleb shut the truck door again without getting in. 1 minute, he said. Atlas stayed beside him. They walked back only as far as the marked edge of the trail, where the deputies had tied bright orange tape between two trees to keep anyone from approaching the creek after dark. Caleb could see the broken ice through the branches, black water glinting under the moon. It looked smaller now, less dramatic, almost ordinary. That was what unsettled him most. The places that change a life rarely look big enough afterward. Caleb leaned one hand against a pine trunk and let the memory come. It was not a full scene. It never was. Just pieces. Cold air. A strap hanging loose. A radio check that sounded wrong. His own voice saying keep moving because the plan was clear and the team was tired and daylight was running out. The moment had passed quickly. The regret had stayed for years. He had served well. He knew that. Other men had told him so. Command had told him so. Papers and medals had told him so. None of it had reached the quiet courtroom inside his chest where he still stood accused. Atlas stepped closer and pressed his side against Caleb's leg. No command. No performance. Just presence. Caleb looked down and breathed out slowly. I thought trusting myself meant never stopping, he whispered. The creek moved beneath the ice, dark and patient. Maybe it means knowing when to stop. Atlas lifted his head toward the water, then back to Caleb. The dog's amber eyes caught a little moonlight, warm against all that blue cold. Caleb crouched and placed both gloved hands on either side of Atlas's face. The fur beneath his palms was thick, damp with melted snow, alive with steady warmth. You saved me today, he said. And you saved him. Atlas blinked, solemn and calm, as if saving was not an achievement, but a duty shared by all creatures willing to listen. A soft sound came from Caleb then, almost a laugh, almost a prayer, and for the first time in a long while it did not hurt. He rose when his phone vibrated. A message from the sheriff's office said Owen was stable, warm, and asking whether Scout could sleep beside him at the hospital. Caleb read it twice. His throat tightened, but this time the ache was clean. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked once more at the creek. The orange tape fluttered in the wind, bright against the dark. By morning, the county would post signs. By spring, maybe someone would build a footbridge. But tonight, the place remained a warning and a blessing at once. Caleb walked back to the truck with Atlas beside him. When he opened the passenger door, Atlas climbed in without hesitation, turned once, and settled on the seat. Caleb got behind the wheel and started the engine. Warm air slowly filled the cab. Before pulling away, he rested his hand on the dog's collar and felt the metal tag under his fingers. Next time you stop, Caleb said softly. I stop. Outside, snow drifted across the road, covering old tracks, softening sharp edges, making the whole forest look newly made. By the time Caleb and Atlas reached home, the porch light had turned the snow in the yard a soft yellow, and the house looked almost too peaceful for the day it had witnessed from a distance. Caleb opened the truck door and let Atlas down first. The German shepherd stepped into the powder, shook snow from his coat, then waited at the bottom of the porch steps until Caleb came around. That small act, the waiting, reached Caleb in a place words rarely did. Inside, the house was warm. The fire he had banked earlier still held a low orange glow in the stove. The coffee in the thermos had gone lukewarm on the counter. His calendar still showed the simple tasks he had written that morning, as if the day had been ordinary and only he had changed. Caleb hung his empty lead on the hook, then stood there with one hand resting on it, thinking of the jacket wrapped around Owen, the puppy tucked in a towel, the old grandfather touching the boy's hair with shaking hands. Atlas went to his water bowl, drank slowly, then returned to Caleb's side without being called. You know, Caleb said, his voice quiet in the kitchen. I used to think silence was something to survive. Atlas sat, ears soft, eyes lifted. Caleb looked through the window toward the dark line of woods. Snow was still falling, covering the trail they had taken, hiding their footprints, smoothing the world into one unbroken sheet. But beneath that smoothness, water still moved. Roots still held the banks. Warnings still traveled in small sounds. Caleb took off his dog tags and laid them on the kitchen table. Then he removed Atlas's collar for the night and placed it beside them. The two pieces of metal touched with a faint, clean note. It was such a small sound, but Caleb heard it fully. For years, he had tried to make his life quiet by keeping pain locked behind order. Tonight, quiet felt different. Not empty. Listening. His phone buzzed again near the sink. A photo came through from the sheriff's office, sent by the deputy who had taken his report. Owen was in a hospital bed under warm blankets, cheeks still pink from the cold, but smiling faintly. Scout was curled in a small blanket beside him, allowed there just long enough for the picture. Caleb stared at it until his vision blurred. Beneath the photo was a short message. He keeps asking about the big dog. Caleb looked at Atlas. That is you. Atlas tilted his head, and Caleb laughed softly, the sound surprising him with how easy it came. He typed back only 4 words. Tell him Atlas listened. Then he set the phone down and knelt in front of the German Shepherd. For a long moment, he simply rested his forehead against Atlas's. The dog's breath was warm against his cheek. The house creaked softly around them, settling into night. Outside, the forest stood dark and patient, no longer only a place of old fear, but a place where a warning had become a rescue. Caleb did not feel healed in the way stories sometimes pretend men are healed all at once. He still carried what he carried, but something had shifted. The verdict inside him had softened. The part of him that once believed every missed sign meant failure had finally seen what listening could still save. He rose, fed Atlas a late dinner, and added 2 pieces of chicken from his own bowl because some acts of gratitude did not need to be explained. Atlas ate, then circled twice on the rug near the stove and lay down with a long, satisfied sigh. Caleb sat beside him on the floor, back against the cabinet, watching the firelight move over the dog's sable fur. Near midnight, the snow stopped. The world outside became still. Caleb closed his eyes and listened, not for danger, not for regret, but for the quiet rhythm of a life that had chosen to stay. A few weeks later, the creek sounded different. Not louder, not safer, just known. Morning sunlight poured through the pines in long silver-gold lines, touching the snow that still lingered in shaded places and the brown earth beginning to show beneath it. The county had built a small wooden footbridge where the old crossing had been, simple and sturdy, with fresh rails, sanded planks, and 2 modest signs reminding hikers to stay off winter ice. Caleb stood at one end with Atlas beside him, watching the water move under the boards. It was still cold, still dark in the deeper places, still carrying secrets beneath a calm surface. But now it had a way across that did not ask anyone to guess. Caleb wore his olive field jacket again. It had been returned washed and folded by Owen's grandfather, with a note tucked in the pocket that said only, "Thank you for bringing my boy home." Caleb had read it once, then placed it in the drawer where he kept things too important to leave lying around. Owen was there that morning too, bundled in a blue coat, one red mitten replaced by a new pair his grandfather had bought in town. Scout bounced at his feet on a short leash, healthy, loud, and very sure the bridge had been built for him personally. When Owen saw Atlas, he smiled with the shy brightness of a child who remembered fear but no longer belonged to it. "That is the big dog," he whispered. Atlas stepped forward and lowered his head so Owen could touch the fur between his ears. Caleb watched the boy's small hand rest there, careful and trusting, and felt something in him settle. The sheriff, a few neighbors, and 2 county workers stood nearby, talking quietly while the creek ran beneath them. No ceremony had been planned, but people came anyway because gratitude has a way of gathering without invitation. Owen's grandfather shook Caleb's hand and did not let go quickly. "I hear that sound now," he said, nodding toward the creek. Caleb knew what he meant. The water, the warning, the mercy hidden in a tiny tick beneath the ice. Caleb looked down at Atlas. "So do I." When the others stepped aside, Caleb and Atlas approached the bridge. For a moment, old habit rose in him. Give the command. Move forward. Cross. Finish the route. But he did not speak. He stopped at the first plank and listened. He heard wind through pine needles, Scout's happy panting, Owen's grandfather clearing his throat, water sliding over stone under the bridge, and Atlas breathing steady beside him. Then Atlas stepped onto the bridge first, calm and certain. Caleb followed. The boards held. The creek passed below them, no longer a trap, no longer only a warning, but part of the road home. Halfway across, Caleb paused and rested one hand on the rail. His dog tags shifted beneath his shirt, and Atlas's collar tag answered with a faint chime in the cold air. 2 small pieces of metal. 2 living witnesses. Caleb looked at the water and thought about all the times grace had not arrived as thunder or rescue lights or easy answers. Sometimes it arrived as a paw on a boot. Sometimes as a dog who refused to move. Sometimes as the courage to stop long enough to hear what love was trying to save. At the far end of the bridge, Atlas looked back at him, amber eyes warm in the winter sun. Caleb smiled, small but real. "Good boy," he said. And this time, the words were not a command. They were a prayer.